Hi history lovers, and welcome back to the channel where I bring you new videos every Friday looking at the events of the past. Today on History Calling, we're travelling back to February 1587 to Fotheringhay Castle in England to ask, how did Mary Queen of Scots die? Hers is one of the most famous royal executions in history, and her final hours and the manner of her death, which was a horribly botched execution, have become legend. Before we learn more, please remember to like and comment on this video and subscribe to the channel with notifications switched on. You can also find me on Instagram, where my username is History Calling, and there's a link for that in the description box below. By February 1587, Mary Stuart, former Queen of Scotland, had been a prisoner in England, where her cousin Elizabeth I ruled for nearly 19 years. During that time there had been numerous rumours of her involvement in plots to oust Elizabeth and take her throne. See my video on the life of Elizabeth I Part 4, which I'll leave linked on screen and in the description box to learn more. But it wasn't until the autumn of 1586 that Elizabeth's spies and counsellors were finally able to gather enough evidence to make charges against Mary stick. She was put on trial in October for her involvement in the Babington Plot to overthrow and assassinate Elizabeth. She was then found guilty and sentenced to death. Elizabeth hesitated to sign the death warrant, however, reluctant to set the precedent of executing an anointed queen and a member of her own extended family, and wary of the political implications of having the former queen of her nearest neighbouring country killed, who also happened to be a queen dowager of France. Finally, however, after trying and failing to convince one of Mary's jailers, Sir Amias Powlett, to quietly assassinate her in a manner which could be passed off as a natural death, she relented and signed on the 1st of February. Soon afterwards, the warrant was sent to Fotheringhay Castle, where Mary was being held, to be delivered by the Earls of Shrewsbury and Kent and Robert Beale, the clerk of Elizabeth's Privy Council. The arrival of so many important men at the castle tipped Mary off to what was coming, but it was not until the night of the 7th of February, and after she had already begun to ready herself for bed, that she was told by her servants that Beale, the two earls, and her jailers needed to speak with her. After redressing and receiving them, she was officially told that she was to die the next morning, and the death warrant was read out to her. Her response was one of great calm, telling them that, "You will do me great good in withdrawing me from this world, out of which I am very glad to go." They offered her the services of the Protestant Dean of Peterborough to help her ready herself for death, but Mary refused, quote, crossing herself in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, saying that she was ready to die in the Catholic Roman faith which her ancestors had professed, from which she would not be removed. Further attempts were made to convert her, but she continued to refuse, instead asking that her own chaplain be brought to her. In what seems to me to have been a petty and unnecessary cruelty, this was denied to her. Her other final requests were also refused. Her account books could not be provided to her as they were in London. There could be no delay to the scheduled 8 a.m. execution to allow her more time to prepare, and the men present could make no promises that her body would be sent to France for burial, which it never was. Her only comfort was her stated belief that she was dying as a martyr for the Catholic faith, though, as I've noted, she was in fact being executed for plotting against Elizabeth and not on account of her religion, something which Elizabeth's emissaries pointed out to her, but which she refused to believe, instead continuing to deny involvement in the Babington Plot. They now left her, and with just a few hours left to live, Mary began her final preparations for death. She ate some supper with her weeping servants, then divided her clothes, money, and other belongings amongst them, noting those which were intended for others not then present. She wrote her will, which I'll leave a link to in the description box as it's too long to include here, in which she made numerous bequests to servants, family members, and charitable institutions, asked for her debts to be paid, and left instructions for masses to be said for her soul. She also wrote a farewell letter to the chaplain she was not allowed to see, Father Duproux. It read, "I have striven this day for my religion, and against receiving my last consolation from the heretics. You will hear from Bourgoin," that's her surgeon Dominic Bourgoin, "and the others, that at least I made protestation of my faith, in the which I will die. I require to have you to make my confession and to receive from you my sacrament. This has been cruelly refused to me, as well as permission to carry away my body and the power of leaving by will freely, or of writing anything, except it pass through their hands and by the good pleasure of their mistress. That's Elizabeth. I must therefore, confessing grief for my sins in general, as I had intended to do to you in particular, imploring you in the name of God this night to watch for me, praying that my sins may be remitted, and to send me your absolution and pardon if at any time I have offended you. I shall endeavour to see you, though in their presence, as they have accorded to me my maître d'hôtel, that's Andrew Melville, the master of her household. And if it is permitted me, before them all on my knees, I will ask your benediction. Advise me as to the most proper prayers for this night and for tomorrow morning. The time is short, and I have no leisure to write, but I will recommend you with the rest, meaning the rest of her household, above all. Your benefits shall be assured to you, and I will recommend you to the king, that's the King of France. Advise me of all you can think of for my soul's help by writing. I will send you a last little token. Marie R. She then composed this letter to her brother-in-law, King Henri III of France. Like the first, it's in French, but when translated, it reads: Sire, my brother-in-law, having by God's will, for my sins I think, thrown myself into the power of the Queen my cousin, at whose hands I have suffered much for almost 20 years, I have finally been condemned to death by her and her estates. I have asked for my papers, which they have taken away, in order that I might make my will, but I have been unable to recover anything of use to me, or even get leave either to make my will freely, or to have my body conveyed after my death, as I would wish, to your kingdom, where I had the honour to be queen, your sister and old ally. Tonight, after dinner, I have been advised of my sentence. I am to be executed like a criminal at 8 in the morning. I have not had time to give you a full account of everything that has happened, but if you will listen to my doctor and my other unfortunate servants, you will learn the truth, and how, thanks be to God, I scorn death, and vow that I meet it innocent of any crime, even if I were their subject. The Catholic faith and the assertion of my God-given right to the English crown are the two issues on which I am condemned, and yet I am not allowed to say that it is for the Catholic religion that I die, but for fear of interference with theirs. The proof of this is that they have taken away my chaplain, and although he is in the building, I have not been able to get permission for him to come and hear my confession and give me the last sacrament, while they have been most insistent that I receive the consolation and instruction of their minister, brought here for that purpose. The bearer of this letter and his companions, most of them your subjects, will testify to my conduct at my last hour. It remains for me to beg your most Christian Majesty, my brother-in-law and old ally, who have always protested your love for me, to give proof now of your goodness on all these points. Firstly, by charity, in paying my unfortunate servants the wages due them. This is a burden on my conscience that only you can relieve. Further, by having prayers offered to God for a queen who has borne the title Most Christian, and who dies a Catholic, stripped of all her possessions. As for my son, I commend him to you in so far as he deserves, for I cannot answer for him. I have taken the liberty of sending you 2 precious stones, talismans against illness, trusting that you will enjoy good health and a long and happy life. Accept them from your loving sister-in-law, who, as she dies, bears witness of her warm feeling for you. Again I commend my servants to you. Give instructions, if it please you, that for my soul's sake part of what you owe me should be paid, and that for the sake of Jesus Christ, to whom I shall pray for you tomorrow as I die, I be left enough to found a memorial mass and give the customary alms. This Wednesday, 2 hours after midnight, your very loving and most true sister, Marie R. Mary now lay down without undressing, and had one of her long-time servants, Jane Kennedy, read to her. Downstairs they could hear the noise of the scaffold being erected in the castle's great hall. At 6 a.m. she rose and went to pray, and between 8 and 9 a.m., one source says it was even as late as 10, the Sheriff of Northampton came to get her for the execution. The events which followed were well documented, and the multiple eyewitness reports tend to be very long, so I'm not going to read out everything here. I will, however, leave links in the description box for a couple of places where you can find the accounts I've used if you'd like to read more. Mary was led down to the Great Hall, assisted in walking by 2 of Sir Amias Powlet's men, rather than the one shown here, as her own servants were too distressed to literally lead their mistress to her death, and she was unable to walk unaided due to poor health. At the foot of the stairs, she paused to speak to Andrew Melville, or Melvin. He was overcome with grief, and told her on his knees that, "Madam, it will be the sorrowfullest message that ever I carried, when I shall report that my queen and dear mistress is dead." Mary was now crying too, and responded that, "You ought to rejoice rather than weep, for that the end of Mary Stuart's troubles is now come. Thou knowest, Melvin, that all this world is but vanity, and full of troubles and sorrows. Carry this message from me, and tell my friends that I die a true woman to my religion, and like a true Scottish woman and a true French woman. But God forgive them that have long desired my end, and he that is the true judge of all secret thoughts knoweth my mind, how that it ever hath been my desire to have Scotland and England united together. Commend me to my son, and tell him that I have not done anything that may prejudice his kingdom of Scotland. And so, good Melvin, farewell." And kissing him, she bade him pray for her. Another source also records this encounter, and has Mary say, "Melville, as thou hast been an honest servant unto me, so I pray thee to continue to my son, and commend me unto him. I have not impugned his religion nor the religion of others, but wish him well. And as I forgive all that have offended me in Scotland, so I would he should also, and beseech God that he would send him his Holy Spirit and illuminate him." Melville agreed to her requests. Mary was now about to enter the hall. She asked her jailers that the terms of her will be respected, and that her servants be well treated, allowed to keep the bequests she had made them, and sent back to their homelands. Sir Amias Powlett reassured her that they would be, quote, "well used." This may have been some comfort to her, but distressingly for the one-time queen, she was again denied access to her own chaplain, and in an additional blow was told by the Earl of Kent that she would not be allowed to take any of her servants in with her, for fear that they would cry out and distract or distress either her or the others who were present to witness the execution, or even try to dip their handkerchiefs in her blood for relics. Mary objected to this, citing her high birth and saying that she had read that when other noblewomen were executed, they were allowed to have their ladies with them. If you've seen my videos on the executions of Queens Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, you'll know that she was quite correct here, as they were allowed to have their servants with them. There was some discussion on this point, and eventually, having promised on behalf of her attendants that they would not misbehave in any way, Mary was allowed to take 6 people in with her. She selected Jane Kennedy, another of her women, Elizabeth Curll, plus 4 men: Andrew Melville, Dominic Bourgoin, whose later account of the execution is one of the sources for this video, another doctor, Jacques Gervais, and her porter, a Mr. Didier. As for what she was wearing, we have a very detailed description of her outfit and general appearance that day, upon which these portraits have been based, though neither of them completely match the written account, which says, "First, she was of stature high, big-made and somewhat round-shouldered, her face broad and fat, double-chinned and hazel-eyed. Her borrowed hair, meaning a wig, aborn, having on her head a dressing of lawn edged with bone lace, a pomander chain," a pomander was a little vessel that you could carry perfume or herbs in to ward off bad smells or illness, an Agnus Dei about her neck, which is an image or figure of a lamb holding either a cross or a flag, and which represents Christ, a crucifix in her hand, and a pair of beads, meaning rosary beads, at her girdle, with a golden cross at the end of them, a veil of lawn fastened to her cowl, bowed out with wire and edged round about with bone lace, a gown of black satin printed with a train, and long sleeves to the ground set with acorn buttons of jet trimmed with pearl, and short sleeves of satin, black, cut with a pair of sleeves of purple velvet, whole under them a whole kirtle of figured satin, black. Her petticoat upper bodies unlaced in the back of crimson satin, and her petticoat skirts of crimson velvet. Her shoes, Spanish leather, with the rough side outward. A pair of green silk garters. Her nether stocks of worsted coloured watchet, clocked with silver and edged on the tops with silver. And next her legs, a pair of jersey hose, white. Robert Beale, who was one of about 300 witnesses to the execution, drew this image of what happened next. It shows the execution in 3 stages. The first of these is on the left, where we see Mary entering the room with her servants. She then climbed the steps onto the wooden scaffold, which was about 2 feet off the floor, 12 feet square, and draped in black cloth, with a railing around it. On it had been placed a chair for her to sit on, and the block, also covered in black. At one end of the scaffold there were stools for the Earls of Kent and Shrewsbury. A fire burned in the hall's hearth as well, as this was, after all, England in February. Mary sat down, with Shrewsbury and Kent on her right, the sheriff on her left, and the executioner and his assistant in front of her. The commission for her death was read out by Beale, which she appeared to pay little heed to. The Dean of Peterborough now came forward, and tried to convince her once again to die in the Protestant faith. According to the eyewitness report of Robert Wise, the scene unfolded as follows, with Mary saying, "Mr. Dean, I am settled in the ancient Catholic Roman religion, and mind to spend my blood in defence of it." Then Mr. Dean said, "Madam, change your opinion, and repent you of your former wickedness, and settle your faith only in Jesus Christ, by him to be saved." Then she answered again and again, "Mr. Dean, trouble not yourself any more, for I am settled and resolved in this my religion, and am purposed therein to die." Then the Earl of Shrewsbury and the Earl of Kent, perceiving her so obstinate, told her that, since she would not hear the exhortation begun by Mr. Dean, "We will pray for your grace, that it stand with God's will, you may have your heart lightened, even at the last hour, with the true knowledge of God, and so die therein." Then she answered, "If you will pray for me, my lords, I will thank you, but to join in prayer with you I will not, for that you and I are not of one religion." Then the lords called for Mr. Dean, who, kneeling on the scaffold stairs, began this prayer, "O most gracious God and merciful Father," etc., all the assembly, saving the Queen of Scots and her servants, saying after him. During the saying of which prayer, the Queen of Scots, sitting upon a stool, having about her neck an Agnus Dei, in her hand a crucifix, at her girdle a pair of beads with a golden cross at the end of them, a Latin book in her hand, began with tears and with loud and fast voice to pray in Latin, and in the midst of her prayers she slided off from her stool, and kneeling, said divers Latin prayers. This strikes me as a farcical scene, with the Protestants and Catholics calling their separate prayers over one another, instead of just letting Mary say the prayer she wanted to in the last minute or two of her life in peace. It was as petty as not letting her see her own priest before she died, and trying to convert her on the scaffold. After it was done, Wise writes that, after the end of Mr. Dean's prayer, she kneeling prayed in English to this effect: "For Christ his afflicted church, and for an end of their troubles, for her son, and for the Queen's majesty, that she might prosper and serve God aright." She confessed that she hoped to be saved by and in the blood of Christ, at the foot of whose crucifix she would shed her blood. Then said the Earl of Kent, "Madam, settle Christ Jesus in your heart, and leave those trumperies." Then she, little regarding, or nothing at all, his good counsel, went forward with her prayers, desiring that God would avert his wrath from this island, and that he would give her grief and forgiveness for her sins. These, with other prayers, she made in English, saying she forgave her enemies with all her heart that had long sought her blood, and desired God to convert them to the truth. And in the end of the prayer she desired all saints to make intercession for her to Jesus Christ, and so kissing the crucifix and crossing of her also, said these words, "Even as thy arms, O Jesus, were spread here upon the cross, so receive me into thy arms of mercy, and forgive me all my sins." The executioner now came forward with his assistant. The axeman's name was Bull, and he was being paid £10 to kill the Scottish Queen, whose forgiveness he and his helper now asked, as was traditional. Mary granted it, telling them, "I forgive you with all my heart, for now I hope you shall make an end of all my troubles." Written accounts record that the two men, with the assistance of Jane Kennedy and Elizabeth Curll, now helped Mary out of her black dress to reveal the crimson petticoat mentioned earlier, red being the colour of martyrdom in the Catholic Church. Beale's drawing, however, shows only the women helping her, but perhaps the men came forward before or afterwards. The drawing is intended to provide only a snapshot of events at different points, much like a modern photograph does. The executioner and his assistant do seem to have been involved in helping her remove her outer garments, as we have a record of a joke she made as they did so, saying with a smile that she never had such grooms to make her unready, and that she never put off her clothes before such a company. When she was down to her petticoat and kirtle, a kirtle being a garment which would go over a smock and petticoat before the main dress was added on top, her ladies began to cry, at which point she told them in French, "Don't cry, I have promised for you." She crossed them, kissed them, and told them that now they would see an end to all her troubles. She bade farewell to her manservants too, and asked them to pray for her. A cambric handkerchief embroidered with gold was produced by one of her women, who kissed it, then tied it around Mary's eyes and over the top of her head. Mary now had just seconds left. The former queen now knelt down on a cushion provided and prayed aloud in Latin, "In te Domine confido non confunder in aeternum," meaning, "In you, Lord, I trust, let me never be confounded." She then reached for the block and placed her head upon it, holding on to it with her hands. As this left her hands in the way of the axe, the executioner's assistant came forward and moved them out of the way, holding Mary in place as you see in this later image. Mary now called out, "In manus tuus, Domine, commendo spiritum meum," meaning, "Into your hands, Lord, I commend my spirit," for as long as she was able. The executioner now struck with his axe and missed. His first stroke instead hit the base of her head. One source says it hit the knot of the handkerchief, but it didn't kill her. Some said she made no noise at this, others that they heard her mutter, "Sweet Jesus," or "Lord Jesus, receive my soul," before the axeman swung again. The second blow was fatal, but even then Mary's head was not completely severed. Instead, the axe had to be used like a saw to finish the job. The executioner lifted up her head with the words, "God save the Queen," but hadn't realised that Mary was wearing a wig, and so the head fell away, showing her very short grey hair. Even more disconcertingly, her lips continued to move for 15 minutes after her death. The Dean of Peterborough announced, "So perish all the Queen's enemies," and the Earl of Kent remarked, while standing over the body, "Such end of all the Queen's and the Gospel's enemies." Mary's little dog had managed to crawl under her clothes and was discovered when the executioner began to remove her stockings. This was actually a very normal thing to do, as executioners were usually given at least some of their victims' belongings as a bonus payment. The dog had to be pulled out, after which it lay in between her head and her body and was covered in blood. It was taken away and washed. Every other trace of Mary's blood was also removed to prevent any relics being created. Most of her garments and belongings, along with the block, were washed or burnt, as you can see on the left-hand side of this image. Her beautiful prayer book, which was supposedly a gift from Pope Pius V, has survived, however, and is now in the Huntington Library in the United States. I'll leave a link in the description box to a blog entry from the Huntington all about this gorgeous object, which includes some photographs of it. Despite the executioner's moves to take some of Mary's clothes, in fact neither he nor his assistant were allowed to keep any of her things, and they were instead compensated for this deviation from normal procedures with additional money. There's also a story that her head was displayed on a cushion at the window of the castle, as you see in this image. I didn't see this detail in any of the accounts I read, in Antonia Fraser's biography of Mary, which is linked in the description box, or in the Queen's entry in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. In fact, one account specifically says that after death, the dead body and the head was carried by the sheriff and his men into the great chamber, lying there ready for the surgeons to embalm her. Nevertheless, the information regarding the displaying of the head may be in a primary source that I was unable to access, which is why I include it here. After the embalming had occurred, Mary's remains were placed in a lead coffin and her internal organs were supposedly buried in the grounds of the castle. When the news reached London, Elizabeth showed great grief at her cousin's death, immediately went into mourning, and set about blaming everyone else around her, claiming that she had never meant Mary to be killed. Remember, though, that she tried to have her servants quietly murder Mary in such a way that she could claim it was a natural death, so her great show of mourning seems highly suspect and politically motivated to me. Mary's body was left in its coffin at Fotheringhay for nearly 6 months, until finally, on the 1st of August, she was buried with great pomp in a Protestant funeral in Peterborough Cathedral, where Catherine of Aragon was also interred. In 1612, her son, who was by then King of England as well as Scotland, had her remains removed to Westminster Abbey, where they still lie today, marked by an elaborate monument and close to the remains of Elizabeth I. And that brings us to the end of the story of the death of Mary Queen of Scots. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel with notifications switched on so you never miss an upload, and let me know in the comments below what you think of the way in which Mary met her end. If royal executions are something you're interested in, as I mentioned earlier, I also have videos on the deaths of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, plus others on the executions of Marie Antoinette in 1793 and the Romanovs in 1918. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.